So this video resumes at the bottom of page 83 of Blood Brothers, at an absolutely crucial point in the play. We've just seen the absolutely vital montage section, remember that of course being a Brechtian feature, part of that agenda of alienation that Willie Russell has, this idea that he wants an audience to remain alienated so that we can, in the words of the narrator in the very beginning of the play, judge for ourselves. Very, very important point. Now, the beginning of this act really represents the high point, the zenith, if you will, for the characters in this play. Mrs. Lyons feels that she has escaped from her past. Similarly, Mrs. Johnston, both of that symbolised through the journey to the countryside. And if you think about the idea of a journey to the countryside itself, in the conventions of comedy, if we think back to The Merchant of Venice, we have this idea of the countryside as a kind of paradise. Remember, we talked about the idea of a green world. But the characters in this play seem to share this wish, at least, in that they feel like their move to the countryside will free them. But actually what Russell does is he subverts that idea by demonstrating, as you will know of course, that it will not save them. No amount of green worlds, no amount of idealization can save you from destiny. And for Willie Russell, your fate, your destiny, is all wrapped up in the problems of society. Everything in this play stems back to the problems of society. So we've said then that this represents a kind of a high point, but also, because this has many tragic elements, within that high point are the seeds that will lead to the destruction, the tragic destruction, or nemesis is the technical Greek term, that we'll see at the end of the play. And if you think back even to the scene that you've just seen, you've got images like broken bottles in the sand. You've got images like lambs in spring, both of which, of course, are foreshadowing to hidden pitfalls, things in the future that will come around to haunt these characters. And, of course, all that foreshadowing links to the tragic form, links to the opening tableau and the narrator's prologue that he speaks. So all of that can be led into that discussion of form. We're reminded that the seeds of the downfall are there, and the most vital way that we're reminded of that is when we see that piggy in the middle freeze frame, or tableau, a technical term, with Linda between the two boys, because it's not the relationship between the two boys that is going to be the seeds of their downfall, but it's the Linda who, purely inadvertently, turns out to be the source of conflict between the two of them as a result of this love triangle. So, let's resume then. We see Edward, after the narrator has finished speaking, we see Edward waiting by a street lamp. Linda approaches, sees him, and goes into a street walk. In other words, she sort of swings her hips in a kind of sort of sexy kind of fashion. That's the implication there. And that seems to be the joke that follows on quite thinly into her speech, because she says, "Well, hello, sweetie pie, looking for a good time? 10 to 7. Hilarious joke, of course. And she laughs. Good time? 10 to 7? It was a joke. Now, what I think is interesting here, the sheer corniness of this joke, I think, reflects her awkwardness. The awkwardness of her feelings around Eddie, because clearly she has some for him, even though Mickey is the one that obviously she's meant, in theory, to be closer to. And therefore I think the awkwardness of the joke reflects that. She sort of forces this joke even further and attempts to raise a bit of a laugh from Edward when she says, it was a joke. I mean, I know it was a lousy joke, but you could at least go into hysterics. This kind of hyperbole there, but it's a bit thin. And Edward only smiles. That's the only response he can do, because obviously he is saddened because of his own feelings for Linda that he knows he can't vocalize, he can't give voice to. He asks, "Where's Mickey?" Linda replies, he must be working overtime. Now, one of the other things that we'll see in this section is that we now get an increasing sense of the division between the two boys, because Mickey, we find out, is 18 and already has a job, and as we're about to see with Eddie, when he says, I go to university tomorrow, his life is about to take a very, very different path. So once again, this is Willie Russell demonstrating the different life chances, life opportunities of working class and middle class characters. So, Edward simply says, oh, and Linda, carrying on this forced jollity, says, what's wrong with you, misery? After a pause, Edward says, I go away to university tomorrow. I suppose while they're in the same place, they can perhaps keep up the pretense that there is something similar about their lives, but once they become physically distanced, I suppose that illusion becomes harder to maintain. And Linda says, tomorrow? You didn't say. Why didn't he say? I think part of it has to be guilt. I think there has to be guilt on his part, knowing that he is about to go away and have opportunities that will open up careers and life pathways that could not even be dreamt of by Mickey and Linda. He goes on though and says, I know. I think I've been pretending that if I didn't mention it, the day would never come. I love it when we're together, the three of us. Don't you? Linda nods. Of course, in that there, the three of us, just like the piggy in the middle on the previous page, is the seeds of the tension. But Linda nods. Can I write to you? Yeah, if you want. Would Mickey mind? Notice again then, clearly, the idea that Mickey is meant to be closer to Linda than Eddie is. And Linda says, why should he? Come on, because you're his girlfriend. No, I'm not. You are, Linda. I'm not. He hasn't asked me. And Edward laughs. You mean he still hasn't? Now, bearing in mind this is 4 years later, I think it has to be said that that is some achievement. But Linda laughs and says, no. But that's ridiculous. I know. I hope for his sake he never has to ask me to marry him. He'll be a pensioner before he gets round to it. More sparse there, more kind of jokes about this very sort of serious, sad thing. I think what we also have to bear in mind is it's very possible that one of the reasons that Mickey does not want to marry, or to ask Linda to marry him, is because how would he support her? He has this poorly paid manual job. That could very well be a reason why he hasn't done it, because he perhaps is worried about the life he could provide for her, and we'll see a little later about exactly what that life that he does provide for her is. Edward pauses, and again, in all the pauses in this section, there's a couple of them, one at the top of this page as well, we see his awkwardness. Clearly there is a conflict between his own feelings and his loyalty towards his friend. He says, he's mad. If I was Mickey, I would have asked you years ago. Now, in this section, these conditional phrases, if I was Mickey, are absolutely crucial. They're repeated time after time after time, and in the song afterwards, the phrase if it was me, again we'll see it time and again. If it was me, if I was him, things like that. But the conditional is very important, because really what he's doing all the way through then there is he's expressing his own feelings, but he's using this sort of cover, if you like, of projecting them onto Mickey. So Linda replies to it affectionately and says, I know you would, because you're soft, you are. And he sings, and see the first conditional. If I could stand inside his shoes, I'd say, how can I compare thee to a summer's day? Of course, the allusion there is to Shakespeare. But again, it's to this, to the sonnets. And again, it's this idea of education for Edward. You could link it neatly back to the dictionary thing all the way back at the start, but also it's about the idea that his education that demonstrates it, but it's also about the feelings that he has for her, which again he's projecting he's using the words of Shakespeare to do it. And Linda is sort of slightly embarrassed by this because, of course, she says, "Oh, go away." But he carries on, and so he says, "I take a page in all the papers, I'd announce it on the news. If I was that guy, if I was in his shoes, if I was him, I'd bring you flowers and ask you to dance. We'd while away the hours making future plans for rainy days and country lanes and trips to the sea. I'd just tell you that I love you if it was me." So all the conditional clauses, all the conditional phrases and sentences that we've mentioned there, you'll have picked them out as we've looked at it. What you'll also see is that this whole sequence of romantic imagery, flowers, dancing, country lanes, all these features that he talks about, and it all testifies to the depth of his feeling. These are all the things that he is longing to say to Linda himself. The second stanza then continues, "But I'm not saying a word, I'm not saying I care." See here how he negates all his true feelings, but of course simply by stating them, negated or not, we realise that he's thinking them. "I'm not saying I care, though I would like you to know that I'm not saying a word, I'm not saying I care. Though I would like you to know, if I was him, I'd have to tell you what I've kept in my heart, that even if we had to live some worlds apart, there would not be a day in which I'd not think of you. If I was him, that's what I'd do." Really, it's very much a continuation of the same ideas as the first one. Reference to things like hearts, for example, reference to things like caring, thinking of you, all these conventional romantic images, but again, all distanced through the use of the negation, through the use of the conditionals. And then the final section, "But I'm not saying a word, I'm not saying I care, though I would like you to know that I'm not saying a word, I'm not saying I care, though I would like you to know." And then the final line here, which comes out of the song form and comes back into the prose, back into the main text. It's almost as if he has to drag himself away from his real feelings. Very kind of poignant moment in this play. Now, the character of Linda, I think, becomes increasingly important from around this time onwards, or perhaps a little before. And the principal reason for that is because her life begins to echo that of Mrs. Johnston's. It begins to sort of follow a similar trajectory, or echo a similar trajectory. Now, first of all, I think you have Linda's youthful optimism, which we see in various places, but right up until the previous bit with the montage. But then, if you think about it, romantic complication. Mrs. Johnston is married and then divorced and left with her many children. Linda is trapped between the two men that she loves and is unable to choose between. And of course there is dramatic irony in that, because we know the reason why she can't choose between is because they are in many respects almost the same person, because they're twins. And there are further aspects of that we'll see in the coming pages, but that's just something to note, the increased importance of Linda and her parallels to Mrs. Johnston. I think it echoes something that we can call the cycle of deprivation, or the cycle of inequality, if you prefer. And it's a point that Russell's making about society, that it's very difficult for people to break out of the shackles of their birth. If you're born into the working class, says Willie Russell, it's very hard for you to get out of it. And that's what he's flagging up. So Linda then goes on and says, "What?" And Edward simply replies, "Mickey," as in he's not Mickey. In other words, in a sense, all he wants to be is Mickey, if that means that it will be a way to her heart. And at this point, Mickey enters. So, Edward greets him cheerfully. Mickey, hiya, Ed, Lind, where have you been? I had to do overtime. I hate that sodding place. More details now, linking to on the previous page about Mickey and the work that he has and the nature of this work. Unpleasant, difficult, manual work. There's a further thing that's worth noting. Now, Mickey and indeed Linda and so on, they are members of what we call the working class. Now, the theory here is that a key part of their identity is wrapped up in that ability to work. It's what gives you pride. It's what allows you to support your family. It's what allows you to have standing and respect in the community. The idea that you can look after it and you don't need to rely on charity, which is traditionally seen as being a kind of enemy of this working class pride. Mickey is defined by his work, horrible though it is. In that sense, I suppose it defines the horribleness of his life, but nonetheless it is a job. And therefore, when we see that his work is taken from him later, it's going to be not simply his employment, but a key part of his identity and his self-respect that will be ripped apart with it. Anyway, we continue on. Edward says, Mickey, I'm going away tomorrow to university. What? You didn't say, echoing what we said on the previous page when he hadn't told Linda either. And he says, I know, but the thing is, I won't be back until Christmas. 3 months. Now, you wouldn't want me to continue in suspense for all that time, would you? Now, what we see now is that Edward is about to commit an act of immense sacrifice. He is about to sacrifice his own feelings and chance with Linda in order for Mickey's happiness. Why does he do this? I think partly it has to be guilt. I think there's an element wherein he thinks that he has everything, Mickey has nothing, and if he were to take Linda away from Mickey too, that would destroy him. So partly guilt, and partly therefore perhaps love or affection for his friend. There are other less noble methods. You could argue that he knows that someone like Linda would never be acceptable to Mrs. Lyons, but I think we have to assume that his intentions here are noble. So Linda asks, what are you on about? And he says, will you talk to Linda? Oh, Eddie, says Linda, rather embarrassed presumably. Edward eggs him on and says, go on, go on. And Mickey turns and goes to her. Linda tries to keep a straight face. And Mickey says, well, the thing is, Linda, I've, and of course in his hesitations there, in his use of those fillers like and the false starts that he engages in, we get a sense of his anxiety, his fear, and perhaps his lack of self-confidence, again, all of which may come from his status in society. But then suddenly he plucks up his courage because quickly he carries on, Linda, for Christ's sake, will you go out with me? And she, just as quickly, so eagerly, says, yeah. And poor Mickey, so embarrassed, simply says, oh, good. Well, I suppose I better, well, come here. He quickly embraces and kisses Linda, and usually this is played as being incredibly sort of passionate, practically kind of, he almost swallows her whole. And when finally they come up, Linda is described as fighting for air, and has a sort of punchline, my God, you take your time getting going, but then there's no stopping you. So this massively dramatic moment, key moment in the play, is again undercut by Russell's use of sparse. It's worth noting, though, that if we said that the relationship between the three of them, that Linda in a way represents what's going to become the source of division between them, it's I think this is another key moment in that, the point at which she chooses Mickey. He replies, I know, come here. And they kiss again, and Edward turns and begins to leave. Key stage direction there, because again we see the distance creeping in. Once he has, as it were, bequeathed Linda to Mickey, there's nothing for him there really anymore, or nothing, certainly it's always going to be painful for him to be there. Mickey calls after him, Eddie, where are you going? I thought we were all going to the club. There's a dance. No, I've got to pack for tomorrow. see the escape he makes. It's too painful for him to be there. Are you sure? Asks Mickey, and Edward nods. See you at Christmas then, Eddie. Listen, I'm going to do loads of overtime between now and then, so the Christmas party's going to be on me, right? Right. It's a deal, Mick. See you. And Linda rushes across and kisses Edward lightly. Notice then a couple of things. Briefly on that previous page, when Mickey invites Eddie to a dance, remember throughout this play we've talked about how dancing is symbolic of escapism. Eddie no longer wishes to do it. Somehow that kind of enjoyment seems hollow to him now that he's just let the love of his life go off with another man. Reference to the Christmas party. Mickey's still thinking in terms of things that are celebratory, because I guess he's not particularly capable of seeing Edward's position. But Edward plays along and says, "Right, it's a deal, Mick. See you." And Linda rushes across and kisses Edward lightly. It's a generous gesture, because in a sense she thanks him for having made this possible, but then at the same time it must be particularly sort of sad for Eddie, because it's also serving as a reminder of what it is that he has given up. Sad moment again, and she thanks him, Eddie. Says, "Thanks, Eddie," and Mickey replies, "Yeah, Eddie, thanks." And Linda and Mickey, arms around each other, watch him go, and they turn and look at each other. Now again, superficially you could see this as a happy moment, but as we've said, because of the way that it drives a wedge in their relationship, we have to see this as more evidence that the tide is turning, that peripeteia has happened, and that this play is now going to move towards its ending, to nemesis, destruction and death, the tragic ending that will hold. That concludes this video on page 87.